name's Adam Roach. I would like to introduce, it's my pleasure to introduce A.P. Gonzalez.
Hello everybody, really glad to have you here for our roundtable discussion. I'm A.P. Gonzalez. I'm a writer, director, sometimes producer, and also been a professor at UCLA in the film department, graduate film department, teaching, writing, and directing. So I've got the honor today to lead this roundtable, and just added to our roundtable is Michael Jablow. And I would like to start with Michael because you've just seen his film, one of the films that he's edited. So he's going to introduce himself. We've never met. We've just met right now.
Right.
So let Michael talk first, and then we'll get to our panel.
Well, just very briefly, I've been in the movie business for 45 years. I have been working in feature films for over 40 years. I started as an assistant and worked my way up on to be a co-editor on Milos Forman's musical Hair. I was one of the editors on Brubaker with Robert Redford in the 70s. I cut Throw Mama from the Train and The Naked Gun. Cut more recently than that, 61. Right before this, I did The Contender with Jeff Bridges and Joan Allen, for which they were both nominated for Oscars, and cut Old School. And studio rat, and it is a pleasure to sit in this fine company.
Thank you, Michael. All right. So let me introduce the rest of our panel. Fred Roos first began producing in the 1960s, director Monte Hellman's film, Back Door to Hell. The film, shot on location in the Philippines, starred one-time unknown actor Jack Nicholson. Roos's ability to spot hidden talent won him a long list of feature films, as well as a 30-year collaboration partnership with director Francis Ford Coppola. In his early film, The Conversation, drummed up 3 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Palme d'Or at Cannes. Fred's career includes well-known movies huge movies like Apocalypse Now, The Godfather Trilogy, The Virgin Suicides of Sofia Coppola, also her Beguile, Marie Antoinette, and Lost in Translation. And he's got 2 new premieres here at the San Antonio Film Festival. 3. Well, I have 2 on here, so you'll have the next one for me. Benched, which I saw just the other day. Stella last weekend. And there's a 3rd, Making Babies, which I know that his son also produced, and he's here to join us. You want to say hi? Hi. There you go. And then sitting next to Fred is Anne Goursaud. And Anne is an accomplished film director and editor, crediting Francis Ford Coppola and Fred Roos for spotting her talent and giving her the chance to edit One from the Heart, which is one of my very favorite movies, and hardly anyone knows it.
Thank you.
Anne's directing credits include Embrace of the Vampire, Poison Ivy 2, and Another 9.5 Weeks. Her editing credits include The Outsiders, Bram Stoker's Dracula, Ironweed, Her Alibi, Crimes of the Heart, Lost Souls, 2 Jakes, Idlewild, and Expired. And also recently edited The Longest Road, which is screening here Saturday night at 7 p.m. Anne received her degree in the history of art at the Sorbonne and a Master's of Fine Art from Columbia University. She's a member of the Directors Guild, the Editors Guild, and the Academy of Arts and Sciences. That's 3 powerful guilds, folks. Jesse Borrego is is a local legend and a recipient of the San Antonio Film Festival's 2018 Legacy Award, this year's award. Born and raised in San Antonio, Borrego studied theater and dance at the University of Incarnate Word. He studied acting at the California Institute of the Arts. In the 1980s, he attended an open audition for the TV series Fame, where he won the role of Jesse Velasquez. Here's some of his well-known credits. I remember you first from Blood In, Blood Out, scared me to death. Mi Vida Loca, Lone Star, and he's recently in Colossal Youth, which just screened here the other night, and a new film is coming out very soon called The Margarita Man. So these are our panelists, and what I'd like to do today is just begin by asking them a few questions about how they got started and so on, and then from there, from time to time, if you have questions, just raise your hand, speak loudly so everyone can hear you. I'd like to start with, how'd you get your big break in Hollywood? I mean, that's the first thing that people want to know. It's a very competitive business. Let's start with Anne.
Luck definitely has something to do with it. Because my way, I mean, I was already editing, but you know, I was not in the mainstream, let's put it that way. After I came out of film school, I worked as an assistant. I did work for a great editor, Larry Silk, who did documentaries. But I was trying to get into the, I thought at that time, if you don't work for like a Barry Markham or one of those guys, you're never going to make it. And I couldn't get them to hire me, you know? They didn't want me. So anyway, I came to California because I had married somebody who went to the AFI. And I didn't want to come. I came against my will, but you know, I had a choice. I could have stayed in New York, but I just said, okay, I'll try it. And I worked on secondary sort of stuff and became a second editor, although I was in the wrong category. Back then, I'm going back because they will show how much luck I had. Back then, when you came to California, the union did not recognize New York. So you had to start from scratch, 3 years as an apprentice, 5 years as an assistant before you were legally able to cut a movie. So of course, that was one of the reasons why I was so depressed about coming to California, because I was already starting to cut. Anyway, this producer got me into the union as an assistant, so I saved 3 years, but I was still not in the right category. So I was cutting, I did a documentary, and then I ended up, but before I did the feature, I left my husband, moved on the street in Beverly Hills in an apartment. And then a few weeks later, there was a first yard sale sign across the street. And the person having the sale was a person called Marsha Nassater, who I made a movie about that has come to the festival in the last 2 years, a documentary called A Classic Role. And Marsha, I did not know anything about who was who in the business at that time. And Marsha was this very powerful person, I didn't know that. And she called me one day, very shortly after I just met her, and she said, Fred Roos called me. He's looking for an editor, a woman editor. So I gave him your name. So I was like, who is Fred Roos? I had no idea. Right? And so she explained everything. And she said, he asked me, is she any good? And she goes, of course she's good. I go, why is he asking me this? Because you're a woman? So she had never seen anything I'd cut. So I went to meet Fred Roos, and that job actually was for a standby editor, for a German editor on Hammett. And I never heard from him. I didn't get it. And I knew, wow, you know, I'm going to meet Fred Roos, but I'm in the wrong category, but whatever. And then I got my first feature to cut, which was great. So I went to New York, cut my first feature, and came back. And there is Fred Roos on the phone. And he goes, Of course, he doesn't know any of this, he doesn't remember any of this, he has met too many people in his life. So he calls me and says, can you come to Zoetrope like right now? And I'm thinking, well, I'm an editor now, why would I go for standby? But I thought, okay, well, I'll go. So I go, and I walk into the office, and Fred goes, all smile this time, and he says, I want you to meet Francis Ford Coppola. And I thought, wow, for a standby job, I don't say anything, right? So that's really interesting. Well, Francis is the biggest director in the world at that time, and I'm going to meet Francis Ford Coppola. Wow! So Francis takes me to the bungalow, and I meet Francis Ford Coppola, and I'm all relaxed, because I have no idea why I'm there. I think it's for a standby job. So there are Francis and Fred and the other producer, Guy Fredrickson, and they interview me. Francis is asking me, and I'm still really fresh out of film school, so I'm blah-blatting about the movies, right, like you do when you're fresh from film school. I mentioned the book, I mispronounce the title, I distort the title. Francis corrects me. I go like, oh, well, that was not too good. And then I said to Francis, Francis, finally, I've been there like half an hour. So I said, Francis, why am I here? So he looks at Fred and Gray, and they laugh, and goes, well, we have 3 films and 3 films in trouble. Okay, very nice meeting you, send a sample of your work, and we'll be in touch with you. And that's how I got to Francis Ford Coppola. This man.
So Fred, you, I hope, have the same remembrance of this connection, but you're very well known for spotting talent. And you and Francis both gave so many people opportunities. How did you spot this talent? And was it mostly, Anne's talent, was it mostly through seeing something she's done, or wanting to give someone young out of school a chance? Was this something that Francis Ford insisted on? How did that go?
Well, it's hard to define. Spotting talent, actors, people behind the scenes, the various arts of behind the scenes making a film. It's kind of all the same. It's just kind of a gut feeling I have. I can't define it. I can't teach it to somebody else. It's just me, my instinct, it's kind of mystical to myself.
And you did a lot of casting, didn't you, in the very beginning? The Outsiders, which is again...
No, I produced that. I was past my last 2 jobs as a casting director were American Graffiti and The Godfather. And after that, which I always wanted to be and expected to be a producer, but casting was my path. Actually, I had produced, before I did Graffiti and The Godfather, I had actually produced 2 little films. The ones with Monty Hellman and Jack Nicholson.
Jesse, how about you? How did you break in? Here you come from San Antonio.
Yeah, well, I got lucky, and I think it's like our stories here is that you have an idea and a dream, and then you start to develop your skill set in that particular direction. But it always comes from, like Fred said, that gut feeling, that inspiration of what is the expression, whether. And then you get involved in some sort of way, like carnies, right? Now you're hanging around with the carnies. So mine was in theater, so I hung around with the theater kids, and it kept me off the streets. We would write our own one-act plays and direct them and star in them in our little neighborhoods. And so I developed the skill set of being able to perform. And so I was a performer. I was the kid that the teachers, the class clown, the teachers always grabbed me for the announcements. I was well-read. And so I came from a performance family. My father was an accordion and singer here in San Antonio, contemporary of Flaco Jimenez. And so I grew up in that entire milieu of music and art. And so it was easy to do it through school, but as a young Chicano kid, I just didn't see the representation in on television, that was our big thing in the 60s and 70s and 80s. It was all television. So if, the alternate was Spanish programming, which my grandparents watched, but I didn't see Mexican Americans. I saw, Mexicanos or Latin America, but I didn't see us. So I really knew that there was something there that I wanted to express. So as a young actor, I always wanted to be me, culturally relevant, authentic, do those, and that's the type of stuff that I was writing and developing. So it progressed to the point where when I graduated, some very open-minded teachers, because at that time I did not have the grades or the money to go to college, but they had just created a brand new theater at the Incarnate Word College. And the Sisters of the Charity of the Incarnate Word were good friends with the Dublin Players, which Gregory Peck was a part of. And so they brought these actors over here to open a theater at Incarnate Word, little Catholic college, which has now become a huge university. And they had built a brand new theater, and Gregory Peck was cutting the ribbon. And I grew up watching movies, so I was like, Gregory Peck's in San Antonio, oh my God. And sure enough, I got a letter. They were trying to recruit more Chicano kids to the program, and I got lucky. And so when I got into college, then I said, okay, maybe I can do this for real. And so my dream was just to get my theater degree and just keep doing it, join Equity, play the stages. And then I realized that I wasn't any better an actor. I was going to get a theater degree. So I looked around. A friend was going to Juilliard, and then I saw a comparable program, California Institute of the Arts, which was closer to LA, which is where I wanted to be. So I wound up auditioning, getting into Cal Arts in my 4th year in college. And when I went over there, there was a popular television show called Fame, and it was about performing arts high school. It was a great, was it Alan Parker, right? There was Alan Parker's film, Fame.
Yes.
And I mean, the film was incredible. And so the television show spin-off was very popular among the kids our age, especially youngsters that had that dream. And we were all in art school, right? And so I guess Bill Blinn, who was the writer, and Meg Lieberman was the casting at that time, and Debbie Allen was just starting to produce and direct on the show. They had this idea that they were going to revive the show. Bill Blinn was leaving the show, and so they were going to pump it up and have an open audition. So it was literally like an American Idol type of audition. I think 4,000 auditioned in New York, 3,000. The day that I went to MGM was like 3,000 people, literally lined up around the MGM studio. And so, this young Chicano kid in acting school, just I hitchhiked a ride up to LA, because Cal Arts was about 40 miles away. Got to LA, stood in line for hours, got in, sang, and then we had to sing and dance before we even got a chance to audition for the casting directors. And so if you made it through those first cattle calls, then you got a chance to come back and get called. My thing was I was such a bohemian actor at that time, such a student, that I didn't even have a headshot. So I think I had someone mimeograph a picture of me that they took, because I couldn't afford prints. So I had a mimeograph, and I had on the back, I'm a student in Cal Arts, right? So I guess they wiped their butt with it, because it disappeared. So at that time, because it was...
Can I ask a question? What did you sing and dance for them?
So when I was deciding what to do, right, it's all strategic, especially in an audition. For actors, it's all strategic. You're always reading the room, right? And that's a skill set that you develop when you get into the industry. So, the skill set was, oh, what's going on? Oh my God, that's an incredible dancer there. Oh my God, listen to that singer. So it was very intimidating. So I said, you know what? I'm going to pick and choose my battles. So I looked around, and in the cattle call, it was either singing or dancing. And I realized everyone was going to do their best talent first. So they said, all right, the singers are going to sing first, the dancers are going to dance first. Well, LA, New York, these were some of the best little Baryshnikovs, hopping around. They all wanted to be on Fame. So I went, well, I'm a good dancer, but I'm not classically trained. So I'm going to go sing first, because I grew up singing my father's songs. So then I'm standing in line, and I'm kind of looking at the ones they're choosing. They're choosing people with natural voices. I said, great, I got a natural voice, but how can I set myself apart? And I said, I'm gonna sing a song on my father's album that I memorized. So I started singing in Spanish, and in the middle of the song I went, oh, by the way, I can sing in English too. And I started singing a pop song of the Gap Band. So they kind of went, thank you very much, and they gave me a number. So I got through the first part of the audition. And so the song was a Carlos Alvarez tango that my father had recorded as a bolero. And my father wasn't around when I was young, so I memorized all his songs. So I had a rep in my head, and I just flung it out there. So that was enough to get me past the first part. So then when I danced, Debbie Allen, well, that's my thing, I love to dance. So now I'm dancing with a bunch of singers. So I'm looking pretty good there. This young Chicano kid's looking pretty good. So I got past that audition, and I was at Cal Arts, was a performing arts college. I went to school with Don Cheadle, Andrew Stanton from Pixar. That was the era that I was with there. So it was lots of talented individuals there. And so a lot of them had gone to the audition and gotten called back. I think Don got called back, a bunch of people got called back. When I didn't get called back, I said to myself, I thought I did pretty well. I wonder what happened. Forgot about it. 2 weeks went by. One young lady was in the final casting. She came back and she said, no, they cast Janet Jackson. They've got all their people. And I blew it off. I went, man, I wish I had gotten a chance to do the one thing I trained for, which is acting. I would have killed it at the end. Whatever. About a week later, someone walks in and says, hey, I saw you on TV. Something about the producers from Fame were looking for you. And I thought he was laughing at me because we all thought we were hotshots. I cussed him out and went to my room. And the next day, one of my suite mate comes over and says, Jesse, wake up. The receptionist from the theater school says she swears she saw your picture. They were flashing your picture on TV and trying to say, does anybody know this kid? We're looking for Jesse Borrego. I went, oh my God, and at that time in the 80s, there wasn't television, cable, none of that. And we were in acting school, we had nothing, we were in the darkness. So I went, oh my God, so my suite mate goes, hey, our suite mates across the hall have the only telephone in the wing. We just made a phone call to the MGM casting office, they're on the phone, go talk to them. So I pick up the phone, and the first thing they asked me was, what are you wearing? And I said, what? They said, what are you wearing? There's been over 100 people calling saying they're Jesse Borrego. So we want to know if you know what you were wearing. I said, Polaroid. I had a cut-off jean jacket, no shirt, bare-chested. We found him! We found him! Can you come in today? I said, sure. So I went in and auditioned for the producers. The rest was history because that's what I do. I'm an actor. So once I got on the show, it was me, Janet Jackson, and Mia Peoples were the new kids. They interviewed us and kind of wrote our characters based on that. So I was a young immigrant kid from Mexico who came up to New York to make it so that he could bring his family over. It's a pretty cool story. But that got me started, and once I got into it, I became a student of the game. 3 years of Fame was film school because they shot on 35. And I was one of those that I asked questions. So the first day on the set, what's a best boy? What's the difference between a gaffer and a grip? Same thing in the editing. What's a cut? What is a montage? Watching dailies. And so I just absorbed everything. And my first film, I was lucky enough to say, right after Fame, was with Martin Scorsese in New York Stories. And New York Stories had, Francis directed one. And then years later, I got to star as Tecumseh in Tecumseh the Last Warrior, which we screened here, which was produced by Francis Ford Coppola and American Zoetrope. It was the five Native American films they produced for TNT. So 6 Degrees of Separation with Francis, but also I was very lucky to, as a young talent, to work with, Martin, my first film. Fame, my first gig, was not just an episodic, but it was 3 years. Yes, so all of that it got me my agent, it got me all of that. So I kind of got jumped into it that way, but I still tell young talent, develop that skill set. Don't wait until you make it. Look how much she struggled with the skill set she already had. And so I think in this industry, you have to jump in with the carnies somewhere and just start learning. As a producer, he started as a casting director, so all of us here have that story of, as young talent, developing that skill set. And I think that's the takeaway from, how we got started.
Thanks. Over to Michael. We have a question first.
So you were in your 20s when you auditioned for that. These were high school kids. Did you still look like a high school kid?
Oh, yes. I mean, I was so worried about, I'm in my 20s, I'm in college, you know, how am I going to look like? But yes, they were, the first thing they did in a cattle call, they brought us in 75 at a time, rehearsal hall A, where Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers created some of the most incredible dances of MGM. So we're in this historic place, they line us up, and they just start going down the line. You, no, sorry, you, no, sorry. And I'm standing there going, oh my God, they're culling the herd. Anybody that looks too old is getting cut. So there I am trying to look as young as possible. But when you look back, I look like a kid. Yeah, exactly. I looked like a kid, so definitely yes, I looked like a high school kid. We had a 26-year-old on there. But that's where you learn right there the whole idea of what is perceived as adolescence on film. And you realize that, because Janet had just barely turned 18, you know, so Janet was, you know, she wasn't considered a kid anymore, so there weren't any of those rules about how long, the labor laws were very strict at that time, as how long people could work under a certain age. So I think but they wanted the entire cast, even though they were high school, to be in their 20s. So, you know, we were all 20-year-olds pretending to be high school kids. Some of us looked kind of there towards the end of the series.
Michael, was your first film your Hollywood break, or did it come a little earlier?
It came earlier after many years. I started in college studying film at Goddard College in Vermont and making extreme experimental films, working with David Mamet, who was just another college student, and I was doing light shows for his mixed media shows. And I went to School of Visual Arts in New York City. Never dreamed of coming to Hollywood. I was in Hollywood, in LA for a wedding, and a friend of mine from School of Visual Arts called up and asked me if I wanted a job for $40 a week. He said they'd feed me on an AFI film. He said they'd feed me 2 meals a day and I could sleep on his couch. And I took it, and I spent the next 2 years at the American Film Institute working on all kinds of AFI films. I was working as both an assistant cameraman, sound man, because I got all these skills in film school that I could actually go out and make a living with. And I was editing. I edited a short film with Jack Lemmon, a short dramatic film, which was just an amazing experience. And all the people that I met at the American Film Institute were people who I have known for 45 years, and I got all my breaks through them. Sometime they were literally by going to the right parties. I went to a party that the production manager was giving, and she introduced me to a couple of people there, a woman named Lindsay Klingman, who was then cutting documentary Hearts and Minds, which won the Oscar. And 2 years later, I ran into her, into a friend of hers who was also at the party in New York City. And she told me that Lindsay had just lost her assistant on Friday and needed a new assistant. Did I want to meet with her? And I went in for a meeting. I met with her. We talked politics all during lunch, and our politics are very close. And we've been friends for over 40 years now. I assisted her on You Light Up My Life. We did a small Western here in Los Angeles, and then I became the first assistant editor on Hair. We had an enormous crew. We had 3 full editors. I became post-production supervisor and co-editor. And within 5 years after getting Hair, I did Brubaker after that, which I also cut although I was hired as the assistant, and the head of post-production at Fox said, I walked into his office afterwards when we'd finished Brubaker and said, I don't think I can be an assistant anymore. And he said, you're not going to be, and got me my first feature at Fox, a comedy with Chevy Chase called Modern Problems in 1981. And I've been a, a single card editor ever since then, and have just been working. But you just have to stick to it. I mean, I never had anything to fall back on. I drove a taxi cab for 2 years when I was going to film school in New York, but I was not going to spend my life as a taxi driver. And once I was out of school, I just never made any money unless it was in the film business. And that's the way you do it.
The thing I want to remind everybody here is that we're talking about editing film and sound editing also on mag film. Today, most of the young people don't know even what that is or get to touch film. A much, much longer process, and I started off as an editor too, so I know the process. And this is something that maybe sometimes you might say to yourself, how did I ever do that in film when now you have much quicker tools? Let me go on to another question about a bigger, maybe some really big challenge in your film career, something that you might describe as one of the biggest challenges that maybe had to do with a particular film or maybe with a particular person. Anybody who would like to start? Okay, Anne?
Challenge? I can't think of a challenge. I have to think about it.
Okay. Anne?
Well, also, I mean, every movie is a challenge.
Okay.
Every movie is difficult. There's nothing easy about what we do. I mean, I don't, for me at least. I mean, not creating. The creating is the easy part for me. I'm lucky because, like you said, I was always, from the moment I was in film school, I was editing. So I had a skill set. I never was afraid of cutting. And when I look back at One from the Heart, where I was like a nobody, and there was Francis Ford Coppola's stuff, and I think about, I look at it and go, oh my God, I was like just chopping the thing to death, and I was like not afraid. And I think that's a skill set. The most difficult thing for me is always the politics. And probably when you work for someone like Francis, it's very difficult because a lot of people are not so happy that you're there, let's put it this way. And so it creates a lot of tension. My difficulties have been the people, not once I'm in the cutting room when I'm working with my crew and my director, I'm fine. I'm totally fine. It's always the politics around it, Sometimes it's what the director is going through. I was fortunate to work with very powerful people, so there was not that much politic filtering because the director was too powerful and could stop it at the door. But when I did Idlewild, I worked for a first-time director with a studio, a black man, and an African-American. And he had so many difficulties. That was very, very, very difficult. He was not getting along with Chuck Rosen, the producer. They were like macho against macho. And it was, and the person from HBO, it was very, very difficult, the politics. As a matter of fact, they took the movie away from us, brought in another editor, or did another cut, and they tried it, and it didn't do better than our film. So we dumped that one and went back to us, right? But you know what I'm saying? And so I realized I was very fortunate because when I was young, I don't think I could have sustained this kind of politics while you're trying to do the creative work and dealing with all that crap. That would be very, very difficult. By that time, I was a lot stronger when I did Idlewild, but it was still difficult because I was trying to. I was getting along, personally I was getting along with everybody, but I did take the person of HBO, she was nameless, I took her aside and I shocked her to death, and she thinks I'm a good person, thank God. And I told her, I'm sorry, but can I say something to you? I think you don't know how to deal with creative people. you know, list and bossing around a very creative person does not work. You have to find a different way to impose your will on somebody like that. And you know what I mean?
This was Marcia Kenter?
Oh, no. This is recent. I mean, this is my last feature film that I really did as an editor. And,
HBO exec?
yeah, and lovely. She's now has a great job. That's great for her. But I felt like she was not helping at all, and it was difficult. Chuck Rosen is a very, very successful, powerful man, and you know, with Brian. Anyway, we got through it, but it was very painful. That's probably the most difficult thing that I've done.
Did she change her ways?
I think I did, because you know the funny thing, years later I went to a woman group, you know, that I don't want to give to it, and I thought for sure she must really not like me very much for this, but she saw me across the way and she waved me, and like she was so happy to see me. And then she helped me with something else. So that, what I said, I mean, I said it with a lot of kindness, but it was still a powerful thing to say to an executive, what I said.
Yeah, I was going to say, did you keep your job? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, she couldn't really fuck around with me because they all liked me, you know. But no, I mean, I thought like, why? But it's the most painful thing to see when you see a director being pushed around by producers. It happened on another movie. The producer was constantly competing with the director, with Bruce Beresford, and I found that so painful. And there I couldn't do anything. In this case, there were so many people on Idlewild that I could, you know, talk to, find ourselves alone, and I could have that moment with her.
Michael, you probably have something to add about those
Just
politics.
very similar stories. I mean, you know, the one thing I have to say is that things have gotten much worse in a lot of the movie business because a real lack of respect for the creative filmmaker in many cases. I mean, when you were, the first big feature I worked on was with Milos Forman. It was the first film after he did One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And when you're in a situation like that, a director can protect everyone who works under him. But I've seen the same kind of thing when I did Throw Mama from the Train. At one point, the studio, which was Orion, which no longer exists, went out and took the film and tested it in New Jersey without Danny DeVito, who was the director, knowing. And we had a last screening here in LA, and Eric Plaskow, who was the president of the studio, came up to Danny and said, look, Danny, we want you to cut 2 scenes out of the movie. And one of the scenes was Danny's favorite scene in the movie. And it's a scene that has no humor in it. It's just a very heartfelt scene where Danny's character is showing Billy Crystal his coin collection that was all change that his father had left him. And Danny walked up to Eric, who towered over him, since Danny is like 4'8". And he said, Eric, you cut that scene out of my movie and I'll cut your balls off. And, you know, when you've got someone who can protect you, it's a whole different thing. I mean, I did pictures in Castle Rock where my director was Andy Scheinman, who was also one of the 5 partners in Castle Rock. We never had to ask anybody anything. He and I made a decision, that was the decision. When I did 2 films for Brian Henson, who was the director, the producer, and the president of the Jim Henson Company, we never had to ask anybody anything. But when you get into big studio situations, you are just constantly dealing with the worst kind of politics. People, because there is an attitude very often among studio executives that we're the real creative people. We're just allowing you to go out and make these movies for us because we're too busy with important things.
Jesse, maybe your biggest challenge might have been around creating a character that maybe at first you couldn't relate to. Could you speak about that, or do you want to speak about
I think it's like they said. There's definitely a disconnect between who we are as creative spirits, and then we get into this industry. Like Doug Simmons says, it's not a movie making industry; it's a movie selling industry. And so then you realize that all of these narratives that you want to express and you want to be a part of and you want to create is actually a numbers game for this whole industry that ultimately is about the bottom dollar. I mean, you look at that, what is it, the kid stays in the picture? If you look at that documentary, the Robert Evans documentary, I mean, all he talks about is having to go to these corporate offices and sing and dance for these guys constantly to keep, you know, Paramount going, to keep, and that's at the top level. So then you get to our level, and again, I tell young actors, I go, just remember, you're a contract laborer. You're a contract laborer, and so you have to think of it on that end, you know, beyond all the hoopla of making my career being a star and all that. So you just become more of a contract laborer as you go higher. But I think that's why a lot of us try to get into producing, because then we get a little more control in terms of the day-to-day creation of the narrative, which is the creative part. But you still gotta go sell it, you still gotta at some point deal with the big machine to get it out into the world, especially if it's commercially viable and it's a story that could have legs and that people would wanna watch and does have an audience. There's a chasm between you and the audience. But that's something that we've all learned as professionals to navigate, and that's kind of the reason why we move as older artists into producing, so that we can have a little more control about that. But even, and I think that the politics then moves into the narratives that are being produced, and I think that's what you're talking about. So as an artist of color, I did see a lot of, yes, it was very, but you know, identifying as a culture that's not really represented in the best way in American cinema. So I've been very lucky, and in my career, I've been able to play very, very authentic American characters. I've been able to be true to my Latino and indigenous culture. And so I've been very lucky, but I have had to take years of unemployment. I remember in the 90s when my daughter was 4 years old, I said to myself, what am I going to tell her when she says, Dad, what were you doing when I was 4 years old? And my stuff's all there on television. And I'm playing zombies and you know, dead guys and rapists and drug dealers. And I went, oh my God. And you know, I'm from the theater, so I said, you know what? And I told my managers, you know, I've got a couple of, you know, hits under my belt. I've got a good reputation. I'm going to stop auditioning for the bad guys. Don't send me the bad guys. Well, work dried up for like years because that was the only type of characters they were writing. And if you had one or two leading man Latino roles, well, you only had one or two guys that were out there. That, you know, Antonio Banderas, and I think, who was the Cuban actor? Famous, Godfather 3.
Andy Garcia.
Andy Garcia. So Andy Garcia and they were, you know, two guys. So they weren't even writing enough roles for them. So, you know, I had to kind of look around and be, but the salvation, and I don't know if it's the same for y'all, but the independent, every time there was an independent film movement, you saw this opportunity to be part of a narrative. You guys saw the film that I showed yesterday, Follow Me Home, which was a hit at the Sundance Festival. It had Alfre Woodard, me, myself, Benjamin Bratt, a young Salma Hayek, Tom Bauer, and it still didn't get any play after being an audience favorite because the politics of the theme that Peter Bratt had written was very anti-Hollywood, anti the idea that everything's okay in America. And it was a challenge, I think, for distributors and for the corporate sponsors to say, well, sure, people love this film, but how are we going to sell it? And so I think as an actor with a long career, I've had to constantly pick and choose and find where can I still be relevant and still feel proud of a career, while at the same time, how do I keep bread on the table? How do I keep working? So for me, it's been more difficult because I have a skill set that is seen. You know, if I, you know, had a skill set that I could actually get away and just be with the director and create the piece there. But I have to put myself out there. I have to audition. I have to represent whatever is being written. And so I think it's been very difficult, and that's been the challenge. And then the politics, because I've been part of incredible films that should have won awards and broken that boundary. And again, they got caught up in the politics of the time. Taylor Hackford directed a film in the 90s called Blood In, Blood Out. And it was a huge Hollywood Pictures investment. I mean, they were behind it. Katzenberg, Jeffrey was a big supporter of Taylor at that time. And we were gonna break boundaries, and the Chicano culture was going to explode onto the American cinematic screen. And then the LA riots happened. And Michael Eisner went, oh, hell no. We are not putting out this film, you know, about the Mexican mafia and the Latino culture in East Asia. No way. And Taylor Hackford goes, what's up? I'm Taylor Hackford. And they said, okay, you gotta change the name. So after promoting it as Blood In, Blood Out for 3 years, they changed the name right before we go to the theater. You know, they really subdue the P&A, the publicity for it, promotion. And we tank at the theater. Nobody knows it's the same film. They don't promote it to the Latino community at all, so nobody knows what it is. It goes into obscurity. They change the name back to Blood In, Blood Out. It goes right to box office, and it explodes. It's probably their most successful flop ever. They just had a big 25th anniversary. Helen Mirren and Taylor were sitting there with us downtown LA with 6,000 people watching this film that's become a cult favorite. It was Billy Bob Thornton's first film. You know, all this incredible talent, but the politics of the time prevented that film from getting to where it was going to get to. Now, they still protected their investment. I mean, I'm pretty sure they've made $1 billion off of that film since it went to DVD and all of it, and they only spent $30 million on it. So for them in their books, they did all right with that intellectual property. But the potential for all of us at that time, we could have had stronger careers, better financial situation from the project itself. And the love that I'm getting from the work that I did then is 25 years later. I could have done a whole lot more with it then. And so the tendency then is to think, well, is the work that I'm doing never going to be validated? And so I think that's why it's important for us to get together in these types of film festivals, because then we can share the work that they are producing now, and we can enjoy it now. And I think now for young filmmakers, this technology, even though they may lose that sense of what it takes to really learn film, what film was, I mean, I don't know if we'll ever go back to that again. But the ideas, right, the concepts are there, the montage, the cut, the narrative, yeah. And so I think that at these types of festivals and the growth of the technology and the ability for that technology to be used by the new filmmakers, all of this incredible young talent that wants to express these narratives, I think it's an exciting thing. So I think for an old dog like me, I feel excited because I think that now I can, you know, really try and produce those narratives that I've been waiting for years to do, and that I only got to do a drop of blood at a time.
I'm with you on that because I've had the same difficulties.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Fred, from a point of view of a producer, did you want to talk about the challenge story? Yeah.
I thought about it, man. He was thinking about it.
Well, Anne's right, every film has challenges and problems. I've never seen a perfectly smooth movie in my life. But Apocalypse Now is up there in the big ones. It was 4 years from the time we got the idea to the time it was in theater. So, shooting was 1.25 years, not continuous, because there were many challenges, but three biggies on the course which caused us to shut down. First, we shot for 1 month with Harvey Keitel playing the Martin Sheen role, Willard. And Francis and I, at the end of that first month of shooting, both decided that Harvey was not right for the part. It was the colossal casting mistake that we all made. Not too many mistakes in my life, but that was. And Harvey, of course, is a brilliant actor, but it wasn't working. So we closed down, and Francis and I went back to LA and brought Marty Sheen back to the Philippines for the part. He had kind of been up for it early, and so we had to close down and start again and reshoot the stuff we had shot for a month with a new actor in the lead. Then there was the typhoon, which destroyed our whole set of a big important part of the film. We had to close down for 6 weeks or something like that, and get that built up again. And then a few more months later, Marty Sheen had a heart attack, and we had to close down again. So those are challenges, don't you think?
I was kind of thinking you were going to choose that one because I know about it.
I can't believe
And
that.
if you want to ever see that real story, see the feature-length documentary Hearts of Darkness, A Filmmaker's
Great.
Apocalypse,
Great.
Beautiful.
which is probably the best thing you'll ever see about what a filmmaker, a real artist, goes through to make his vision of his work.
It's great because it's an illusion because you see when you're interviewing Francis, you know, it's in his later years, so he looks great. But it kind of
Seems in the story that he ages throughout those 4 years. Because as you're interviewing and he's talking about finishing it, he looks older, so you're kind of going, oh, poor Francis, he grayed up on that 4 years. But it's an incredible documentary, and an incredible film, man. One of my favorites as a young actor, as a young, moviegoer, just sitting there going, wow, this is what I want to do. But just to show you, I'm pretty sure there were times when you thought, this film is never going to come out. We're never going to finish it.
While we were making it, we started calling it Apocalypse Never.
what's that?
There's that Terry Gilliam film that never got finished. It was the Don Quixote film. Very similar. When you look at, there's a documentary about that. Went through a lot of stuff. They didn't make it. They never finished that.
There was a rumor that it was coming around again.
Yeah.
Finished
Yes,
it?
Yeah.
it's coming out next
I
year.
am so looking forward to that. Yes.
At the Cannes Film Festival.
Wow.
There was a whole legal dispute with the producer.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Whoa. But it's a similar thing, and I mean they pushed on through. But I think that's working for. And I think that's the best part of it is, and all of us in committing to this life and this career, we've gotten the chance to work with some incredible talent. And that talent loves and respects our talent, and that's ultimately the best that you can take away from it. For all the troubles and challenges, I mean, when you're able to look at something, even Follow Me Home, that again, this film was a hit at the Sundance Film Festival. They are only prints. When I was trying to get it screened here, and I called Peter and I said, hey, I know you don't really jive this film anymore, but I'm going to show it. He goes, bro, I don't have any digital copies. He goes, I only have 35mm prints. And I said, I went to the festival director, Adam, I go, you want to be a real film festival? Get me a 35mm projector. But again, he was going through so many challenges, he was like, bro, I don't know if I can pull it off at the last minute. And I said, no, don't worry about it. So he literally had to go to Skywalker Sound, burn a DVD off of a 3/4 copy that they had of the print in order to show this film that we showed yesterday. But when I get to show it to you and you guys vibe on it and you go, where can I get it? And I'm sorry that it's not on DVD and it's not available. But for that moment, we shared that catharsis of all that love and energy and those challenges that we overcame. Because the same thing on that film, when we started filming that film, we had less than 200,000. When we started shooting that film, our DP had a heart attack after the first week. And we thought we were dead in the water. I mean, for a low budget film, we had no money to hire anyone else. Someone stepped in, kept us shooting that weekend. They were all on another job. They finished there, they left, and by that time we'd already recruited another DP, Garrett, who wound up. And they all kept a consistent look. They all were into the aesthetic of the director, and the film actually made it through. So you push through those challenges, and ultimately when the lights are on and you're all sitting there, and we're all sitting there in the darkness, going through that experience together, that's the best. So.
We've got a couple of distinguished editors sitting here with us, and editors are often unheralded in the general public. I want to ask you both, what attracts you to editing? Why editing? I know you've gone on to be a director, and let's talk about the editing part first.
Well, for me, I mean, when I was in film school, I come from a provincial town. I always go around telling my story. And I really had no means to support myself. Once I was in film school, I realized, my dream of making my personal little film. And luckily, the first time we did an editing exercise, we went to shoot something. It was an action, a fight. And when I started to cut it, Super 8, all right, and it was like, eureka, I know how to do this. And I didn't know why. I never thought about it before. I mean, I saw a lot of movies. My family would go to the movies every Sunday. So it was what working class people did in France. And so I saw a lot of movies, but I had no idea what editing really was. So, but that moment when I realized, wait a second, I instinctively know how to do this. So when you feel like, wait a second, maybe I'm going to be good at this, you want to explore more, right? And also because I realized that that's the key to making a good movie, is understanding editing. And when I directed my first feature, which I was only given 13 days to do, that's when I understood really that when you understand editing, you can actually make a movie in 13 days and have every piece of film that you need. So I kind of bumped into it and realized I could do that. And I'm still fascinated by it because it's so imaginative, and how you put these things together and what you create, something can be so different.
I've always thought of editing as dancing. It's really about rhythm, music, timing. Michael, would you want to tell us a little bit about why you're so attracted or why you've edited for so long?
Let me just say I completely agree. Editing is very close to music because you're constantly looking for the rhythm of conversations, for the way that people talk to each other. It all has to do with rhythm. But it's a matter of personal choice too, because I spent a lot of time early in my career on sets. I directed some when I was in film school and discovered that I really was not temperamentally adapted to answering 100 people coming up to me every single day asking me questions. And sitting around, if you've ever spent any time on film sets, sometimes there's a tremendous amount of waiting, of sitting around and waiting. Also, because of its very nature, you need, big film crews. And after the script leaves the writer, the one place in the process that you have the same kind of one-to-one relationship with the film is in the editing room. And I loved having that degree of control. I loved, literally, I loved sitting by myself in a dark room, playing with pictures and sound and music music and figuring out how to put it all together. It's the most incredible puzzle. And I've also enjoyed working, collaborating with directors. Sometimes when it's good, the relationship is just fantastic. And that's really it. I've had a wonderful time editing things. I am now retired as an editor, but I am the head of the editing department at the American Film Institute, where I started 46 years ago. And in fact, Anne is going to be one of my mentors for the second-year students this year. So,
Another reason why I became an editor is because when I was in film school, I still have an accent, but I had a stronger accent. and people were very nice, but they would make fun of me because I was learning all the technical stuff that I didn't know in French. So I would go like, what is is, right? Because we learn about sound, they would go like, hiss, right? So everybody was always making fun of me. So I think another reason why I love the cutting room, based on what you said, is that I didn't have to speak. And I was I was by myself, and I didn't have to deal with the fact I was a foreigner with that problem.
I think you have a wonderful accent.
Thank you.
Speaking of editing, because that seems to be this particular moment, Godfather Part 2, the post-production was 8 months. That sounds...
Yeah, that sounds right.
That's how we operated in those days. Well, one of the reasons was, before I tell this story, to tell in a brief way the difference between editing in those days, where you have bins with pieces of film hanging there, as opposed to machines. A lot of these people don't even know about how that.
And I was going to ask that too.
yeah, I mean, it's a very different kind of thing. When I worked on Hair, we shot for 9 months. And in spite of the fact that we were scheduled to shoot for 4 months, but we were very lucky to have both independent financing and studio support, and then we edited for 9 months. I mean, you took a tremendous amount of time. Very rarely now, unless you're doing a Marvel film or a Star Wars film, will they give you the time, and very often they'll just throw editors at something.
Explain. You can show a director. He will give you a note,
Yes,
and you can turn it around in a half hour and show it to him.
yes.
You'd have to show
in
it
the-
the next day.
Oh my God, the next day, the thing that you never dreaded anything, but let's say that the director had an idea to restructure the picture, which I'm sure in Godfather Part 2, one of the really wonderful
I will
things
tell that
about the
story.
way that that's cut is the intercutting of the young Vito Corleone with Michael Corleone later, becoming the Godfather. If you had to restructure things, you had to roll everything off onto cores or onto separate reels and line them up, and then assistants would rebuild them. And then if it didn't work, you had to go through the whole thing again, and sometime it would take 2 or 3
You
days.
had to physically hold the film.
Yes, you physically held the
In
film.
editing rooms now, there is no film. It's all explained.
Yes, and there were all kinds of strange little skills that you learned how to do, so that because it was on film, if you had it dissolve, you couldn't see the dissolve for days, and you would run streamers of either grease pencil or tape.
Grease marker.
Yes, grease marker or describing showing where, so there'd be a line moving across the screen. And that was supposed to be the dissolve. Yes, you had to imagine a lot of things. And you only had, even if I was a chem editor, we only had 2 soundtracks. So, I mean, you couldn't do a lot of complicated. Now I work with 8 soundtracks, 16 soundtracks, and the studios expect a first cut to look like it's ready to go into the theaters.
If you look at Godfather Part 2, which I think is one of the great films of all time, it seems so perfect, the back and forth between the two eras. And it took many, many cuts. Try, when do you leave that era, go to the other era, and the back? Tried it many, many, many times. And I remember the final, we previewed in San Diego once, and we knew then it worked. But it took months and months to get to that cut that seemed so perfect and natural now. And it wasn't in the script just like that. You had to experiment to get it right.
I was, you know, the movie Annie Hall?
Yes.
That movie was not, like, you know, it was not conceived at all like that. Or Frozen Bloom, they totally rethought. It was a movie about him and different things that happened to him, but the relationship with Annie was so good that it became the focus of the film. So they totally reimagined the movie in the editing room. There was a completely different script. So people don't know that, but that's such a perfect movie. And that perfection was found in the editing.
In fact, that movie, Ralph Rosenblum wrote a book called After the Shooting Stops.
Great book on
And
editing.
that saved my life at one point when I was editing, because he tells the story how they had the first screening of Annie Hall, which at the time was titled Anhedonia, which means an inability to experience joy. And they screened it, and they said, they walked out of the screening and said, this is unreleasable. And they, you know, we should just shelve it and walk away. And they went back in and rethought, and there are all these stand-up bits that Woody Allen is doing, talking to the camera, telling the story of Annie Hall, and those were all shot later on. And this whole structure of the film was developed in post-production because it was not what was written in the script, and they did all this other, they felt they needed more laughs. They went back, there's a scene where you know, Woody Allen is trying cocaine for the first time and sneezes. That was a reshot scene. Later in his career, he always scheduled 2 weeks of reshoots and things like that. But when I was cutting my first film, I had Modern Problems. I had a director who was smoking far too much marijuana at that point, and thought that every little grimace and twitch that an actor did was really interesting. And comedy is all based on pace and rhythm. And we took the film and previewed it, and we got a very low preview score. And I went home and crawled into bed for the weekend, and thinking that I was going to be fired since it was my first film. And instead, I got a phone call on Sunday morning from Sherry Lansing, who was the president of the studio, saying that they wanted the director to step back from the process for a while, and they were putting me in charge of it. And I got the film doing what it should do. I actually got them to give us another day of shooting and reshot every single one of Chevy Chase's close-ups for the entire movie. And not for the entire movie, but for these scenes, it was he supposedly had psychokinetic powers, and he would make faces, but he was very depressed at that point and was not funny at all. Yeah, so we actually shot him being funny and doing a Chevy Chase thing, and the film went out and made $30 million in 30 days.
I've got a producer's question for Fred. How hands-on are you with either with the director while shooting, or in preparation for shooting, or in mostly, in the beginning, find financing for a film. After you do that, is your work a little over, or do you work really hands-on with the others?
It's not just finding financing, there's a lot of things. In many cases, you probably found the script or the book to adapt to a script. You guided the development of the script. You put the right creative team behind it, production designer, editor, DP. Those are all, you do it in conjunction with your director, of course. But it depends on if it's a first-time director and they need the support, you're there a lot. I would never hover around Francis, be on the set every minute. Like, first of all, sets are boring. I would, if there was a problem or something, I would come and I would spend part of every day there, but I didn't hover, and I would be a sounding board. What do you think of that? Did that scene work? Should we do another take? But I don't hover. I see a lot of producers today just go to the set, say they're all day long, and I don't get it. I don't know what they think they're doing. What's the question?
No, I have a project with Fred as a producer, and I would say Fred is a creative producer. What I mean by that is that he has wonderful ideas about the script. I mean, he collaborates creatively with the director. That's a special producer. Other producers do not have that talent. And Fred, besides the fact that he's a genius at casting, I mean, there's nobody better than him in spotting the right person for the right part. But he's very creative. He's a creative man.
Thank you.
So I've got an actor's question for you, Jesse. You've portrayed so many different characters in the films and theater. What was the most difficult one for you to get in character? For you to understand this role enough to say, hey, I can do this guy?
Again, I've been really lucky. I think the characters that I've been able to put into American cinema, not just in films, but also in television, I've been lucky enough, because I really say that writing for television in terms of cultural diversity, it's very difficult because, you know, the television narrative is, you know, I had a really good friend whose father was an NBC exec, and we were in art school together. He was my roommate, and we went to go visit him at the Palisades, and we were young actors, and we were talking about how we were going to change the world, and, you know, we were going to, you know, break the boundaries, the color boundaries. Oh, didn't right? There were no colors at that time. And I said to myself, and the first thing that the executive's wife said to us, my friend's mom, is she goes, no. When I come home at night, I just want to turn on the TV, and I just want to see things dancing and moving around. I don't want to think too much. And this was an top NBC executive's wife. So I was getting it from the horse's mouth, the way they think, right? And so I went, oh man, okay. So I think as an actor, the challenge was always to feel good about what you're doing, you know? And so I think it's like every project is like that. I don't think I had one. I think the toughest part were the ones that I had to walk away from because I needed the jobs at that time. I think the toughest ones were the roles that I was offered or that I was asked to audition for, where I went, no, I can't do this. It says nothing. And it's interesting because it's always the hottest TV show in that era. And so I think it's every season is a difficulty because I know that there's going to be 5 auditions that I'm going to have to walk away from, even though they're top dollar, they're top tier, because I just don't agree with the narrative, the perspective. And I think we're going to change that. As creative artists, we're going to change that. So I had to get away from constantly blaming the industry for what was coming out and staying creative in that realm. So I think that's been the challenge. the ones that I walked away from were probably the hardest ones to wrap my.
Thank you. We've been given a few more minutes, so let's take some questions from the audience. Right here, ma'am?
My father would roll over in his grave if I did not ask Mr. Roos this question. My father is the one who, he introduced me to the love of film. I mean, and American Graffiti is one of my all-time favorite films. I just watched it 2 weeks ago again with my grandson, who's only 4, that he was dancing and watching it. The Godfather is, I just can't even tell you how many times I've seen The Godfather and Godfather 2. It's incredible. So thank you all for being here. But Mr. Roos, for The Godfather in particular, that casting, there are so many names that, you know, that was their, if not their first initial big role. What was that like? I mean, how did you find, it was Harrison Ford and Suzanne Summers and Cindy Williams, and I mean, there were so many.
Are you talking about graffiti?
Yes,
Graffiti.
yes.
Well, American Graffiti, George somehow gave me the script just as I was about to take a trip to Europe for some other film. And I arrived in Paris on a Sunday and everything was closed and nothing was happening. So I took it out and read it and thought it was great. And I cast about 75% of it in my mind right then. From among I was part of a circle of young actors, and I knew Cindy and Candy and all those people. They were my friends. However, you don't just, George was kind of new. He had only done one other film before that. And he wanted to see every kid in town. And we did. Went on for weeks. And he sat with me through it all. He didn't just have me pre-screen. He sat with me through it all. I knew who it would end up being. And I had to finesse when I would bring them in and kind of woo him towards the right choices. And, but we saw hundreds of kids and went on for weeks. But I cast in my brain that day I read it.
That was the cast that you ended up with?
Most of
Yeah.
them?
And I picked my time when I brought them in to the interview. So, you know, it's hard to explain, but you have to kind of lead your director sometimes. To something.
It's back to your good instinct.
You gotta lead them to
Another
water.
question. Yes, sir.
So I just wanted, again, compliment Mr. Roos with all his work. I mean, all the hardships that we passed to making our film, being able to be here is worth a while meeting you right now. I mean, I'm admiring Apocalypse Now changed my life, and I gotta tell you that because this is what, the reason that I'm here is because of Apocalypse Now. Thank you so much for making that film. My question would be to the editors. When you talk about in the later years, where on the old years, when you were editing on film, now it's all done by computers, by all of that. Do you have more, the director is more involved during the editing? I mean, is he really down your neck really hard right now? Or is it was better as a solitude work where you were cutting, you get a note, and then the next day you go to the director? Or it's always been the director in front of you making sure that everything's
Well, you want to go first, or?
No.
Well, I've been very lucky because they leave me alone, and I don't think I would have done well with somebody in my home all the time. Probably when I was starting, because I was too frightened. And so having the independence and the time to do your own thing, and then showing it, I was very fortunate. Francis is not a harborer. It does not work like that. When he shows up, it's intense, and then he goes away. So I love working for him. Love working for him. Love working for him. Now,
Yeah, some directors, particularly first-time directors, feel they have to sit with the editor all day long, hover right next door. there's no perfect way. I mean, that can work as well, I suppose. But as Anne says, Francis would hire wonderful creative editors and would let them do the cut. Then he would see it. I like that, or let's tweak it a little bit, or show me something else. But he would not just sit there and hover over them. But that can work too. Some directors do that, and I can't knock that as well.
Want to answer something, Michael?
Whereas when I was working with Miloš Forman, Miloš was in the editing room every day. He was on a diet, so we couldn't go out for lunch. They would bring us lunch, and when Lindsay Klingman was eating, I would be the one who was operating the cam because he just never wanted to stop. And we spent, 9 months like that, and him smoking big cigars the whole time in the editing room. I've also worked with English directors. I once suggested to an English director named Waris Hussein, who I was working with, that he come into the editing room and I show him something, and he said, "Oh no, dear boy, you're the editor. I'll give you a suggestion, and you just do what you think is best." So it really is not a matter of film or, it's a matter of the temperament of the editor. Billy Crystal, when I was cutting 61, was in the editing room every single day, except when he was going out actually doing practice with the Yankees before the World Series, because we were in New York City cutting at that point, and that was the Subway Series between the Yankees and the Mets. And literally, I had somebody called called the editing room. We didn't have cell phones nearly as much in 2000, and it was Joe Torre calling up Billy saying, did he want to come over to Yankee Stadium and practice with the team? Because they wanted him to come.
Which way do you prefer?
I actually prefer, like Anne, to be trusted and to get notes from a director and not have to sit there and make all the changes constantly. Because the director is God knows they're very valuable, but if they are sitting there all the time, they get as myopic as an editor does.
Exactly.
Because they are constantly watching the film, and you know that when you watch the film lots and lots of times, it becomes something dead to you.
Well,
to
I
a
think
great
that's
degree
why
until you put it in front of an audience, and it's good. It's why I've always loved having the producers come into the editing room, because they're a fresh set of eyes. And the degree to which a director can be a fresh set of eyes is also extremely welcome.
That's why I think Francis does it that way, because he goes away and it's fresh. Very often when we would screen, he would say, okay, I've never seen this film before. He would play this game with himself, right? And I try to do that, it's hard. But it's a very good exercise. Otherwise, you're just like losing, you know what I mean? If you're fresh, so I think that's why you would always go away and come back. Because then you would it's a new experience. Maybe I'll see it a different way and have more ideas.
We have another question here. Sure.
I know you guys been in the evolution of.
Could you speak up for all of us back here?
I'm sorry. I know you guys have been in the evolution of film until now, but would you encourage filmmakers today do you think that there's incentive still to go towards the big studio route, besides financing and developing a great team?
You see what the big studios are making.
Yeah.
Tentpole movies, superhero movies, all that. Is that what if that's what you want to do, you, I guess, head for that. But it's going to be hard to get going. I warn you. So you got to start on the indie route. Find 10 dentists who want to playing movies and get them to finance a little movie for you.
But the movie will probably be a lot closer to the narrative that you want to express than trying to get an idea and hope that you're gonna hit the grand slam in Hollywood. Now that happens, but again, you have to start getting into those circles. That leads to a question, most of us develop our talents by developing a certain skill set, and then that got us into the career. Is it the same thing for people that want to just be producers? What kind of a skill set would they develop to start doing that specifically? You know?
There's all kinds of people who are anointing themselves producers. Many people, make a fortune in some other field, and they want to play in this field. Thank God for them, because they help you get a lot of movies made. But sometimes they use their techniques from their other field, where they kind of boss people around, and they don't really understand how artists work. It's funny with the artists, the filmmakers, even if it's a first-time filmmaker that has no history or no resume, will fight for his film. And money people often just don't understand that. Why don't they just do what I tell them? Artists are artists. That's how they work. It's in their DNA.
Stay creative.
We can take one more question, but we have to wrap it up because of the next show.
One more question.
I wanted to ask Anne about Idlewild, but you said your piece about Idlewild, how difficult that was. And you also, there could not be more contrasting different movie styles than Idlewild and Bram Stoker's Dracula. I wanted you to talk about how, that movie haunted me too. I used to put it on. It was one of the best movies I've ever seen.
Which one?
Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Oh, yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about Bram Stoker's and how you edited that and how it was so dark and it was just a really great movie?
My favorite. Yeah, as an editor, yeah. Well, I was called in April to recut it because they had a preview and the movie has not done so well. And Frances called me out of the blue, and I said, why me? I don't know anything about vampires. I'm French. And he said, well, have you read the book? I said, no, never. So he sent me anyway, to make a story short, I understood why he chose me for that. Because he's very specific in casting, like I'm mad that he never gave me action. Because, anyway. I mean, this is a very so basically I reworked the movie until October when we had a preview in Denver, and it was a huge success right then and there at the preview. But it's a very interesting movie because it had different challenges in terms of editing. You had spectacular montages, which is kind of a signature of Frances, and they did a lot of work, like arriving in London, all those. And then there was some acting problems that had to be because, the girl liked a little depth and he was a little stiff, all that kind of stuff. So there was acting problem, there was, the movie for me and why I knew how to cut it is about female sexuality. And that's why he chose me to cut it. The man is smart. And, it's a Victorian story, so once you understand that the vampire stands for wanting to be free for a female, and what I discovered is that Bram Stoker's mother was a feminist and was friend with, what's the name of the writers? They were Irish feminists. What's his name? The great gay playwright. No, not Shelley. Anyway, it will come back to me. Anyway, so I understood this was written, no, much earlier in that 19th century. So, once I knew that the way I saw the movie, like when I cut the scene where it tells us that he's Dracula, that's a very important scene. So all this, once you understand, I knew to cut this movie once I got what the movie, for me, was about. It was not about having a scary monster. The scary monster was her sexuality, being married to, about to be married to a very boring guy, right? And then this other charming man shows up. And so, you know, so there were so many great scenes, and I reworked them all except for when she comes down in the bride dress, in the, you know, the crypt. That was perfect. But otherwise, you know, so I loved it because there was, the beginning was struggling, we had to finish at the beginning, we were going to go mixing, and Fred, the other producer, Fred, was like, I've never worked on a movie that doesn't have a beginning before we go to mixing. Even on Godfather 3, we didn't have that problem. And I'm like, don't worry, we're going to find it, we're going to find it, sure enough. You know, we always do, don't we, Michael? We always figure it out, eventually we do, you know. So yeah, I loved it because of the challenges, you know.
And the casting was done pretty well because Gary Oldman's obviously much more exciting than Keanu Reeves. Much more interesting.
Keanu was a lovely man, great, yeah.
And Gary can be a pain in the ass.
Yeah, and Francis, I think, I don't know because I was not there, but it was not the easiest thing. And one last story, they did the ADR in LA. I was not there because I was upset in San Francisco. Gary was very upset with that scene where he tells her that he's Dracula. He was absolutely incensed. He hated it. Yeah, he said it was all wrong because I had really eliminated most of his tunes, the scenery close-up. And I had gone to a wider shot because of, you know, what we call suspense. You know, if somebody calls you, somebody's dead, you're not going to go, ah, right? Yeah. You have to process. It takes a few seconds in acting to process this kind of information, enormous, right? So in a sense, with Dracula, it's the same thing, right? She tells her, you know. So I had gone to the wider shot to have that moment of, you know, suspension between, you know. And he hated that. He wanted everything in close-up. So I remember Francis came back and he said, "Wow, he doesn't really like it." And and I said, "Well, so exactly what I'm telling you. I go back with Francis and we explain why I did it this way." And Francis says, "Yeah, we're keeping it that way."
But even as an actor, the one thing I learned film as studying in acting. In art school. So I learned, you know, the original ideas of the art form itself and why montage works because of the art of it. So when I got into the industry, I understood that the editing part of it, and I always tell first-time directors, I go, look, you are gonna give me my best performance in the editing, and I also trust editors because of that. And I would have been overjoyed that you got rid of my scenery chewing scenes.
Like Nicholson said, sometimes they fuck you up, and sometimes they save your asses.
Yes. They have saved my asses so many times. Thank you.
I want to thank the panelists and thank the audience for being here.